We're recording this now Thursday, March 20th. Johnny McGonigal here, and I'm joined by Nick Farabaugh, PennLive Steelers writer. We've got Bob Flounders as well as Jim Carlson working the NCAA wrestling tournament in Philly. We've got Max Ralph taking some much needed and much deserved PTO. And so we've got Nick here with us to talk all things NFL draft, Penn State, Abdul Carter, Tyler Warren in that group, as well as the Steelers, as well as some prospects that we like. We're sitting here a little more than a month away from the start of the NFL draft, Nick, and Aaron Rodgers still hasn't emerged from his deep sleep, right? His meditating, his thoughts. What are your thoughts right now on that? We'll start off with that.
Yeah, he's still in his darkness retreat, right? I think that the whole thing that's going on right now, man. It's like a limbo waiting game with him. It's what Aaron Rodgers kind of does. He did this the last time before he picked the Jets, right? It took until draft week. I'm not saying it's going to take until draft week this time, but it did last time. And so right now, the Steelers kind of don't have many other options. If you watch Steelers Breakdown, our Steelers podcast, I've talked about how they really don't want to bring Russell Wilson back. So while people say just pivot to Russ, it's really not something they want to do. And then behind him, I mean, look at the other options: Joe Flacco, Jameis Winston, Carson Wentz. It's not a lot of players at that point. I think you're getting into the territory of just roll with Mason Rudolph. Now they probably will sign another vet. I don't think they're going to panic draft anybody in the first round. I think that's important to note. I don't think they're going to draft Jackson Dart just because they have to draft a quarterback. They're going to draft a quarterback at some point in that 3 to 4 range. They showed interest in Jalen Milroe at Alabama Pro Day. They're interested in Tyler Shuck. Maybe there's some low upside trade, high upside, low risk trade candidates they can get. A guy like Joe Milton could be out there. Maybe Will Levis from the Titans.
I was going to say the former Penn State backup who transferred to Kentucky and was a second round pick right by the Titans, and hasn't really worked out there for him. It's a reason why the Titans are number 1 overall, or at least a part of the reason. I mean, it's a barren roster. A possible landing spot for Abdul Carter if they don't go quarterback or trade out of that number 1 pick. But yeah, Will Levis, Steelers quarterback. That would be at least entertaining. You'd have maybe Hines comes back in with the Mayo and you get some good ads out of it. I don't know.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Maybe it all works out and it's great, but I don't even think that's a super appealing option for them. I mean, listen, even if you liked Will Levis out of Kentucky, I mean, 13 touchdowns, 12 picks. I mean, you could just sign Jameis Winston and get that stat line.
Yeah, exactly.
It's a very Jameis stat line. Jameis Winston, by the way, over his last 17 full games, has thrown for over 5,000 yards, has thrown for 33 touchdowns, and 23 interceptions. Just a hilarious stat line from Jameis there. But the Steelers really are just super content waiting out Aaron Rodgers, and we'll kind of see how it goes. Listen, I don't think he's some needle mover for them, but he is better than the other options out there right now, in my opinion. So we'll see. But I don't think Russ is really a viable option for them. So they're kind of in this offland thing where it's just, let's see what Aaron Rodgers wants, and whatever he decides, he decides.
Yeah. Well, they're one of a few teams, as is, always the case or tends to be the case, teams that need a quarterback. And, you look at the top of the draft, Titans, Browns, you got the Giants in there at 3, maybe even the Raiders. I know the Raiders traded for Geno, but maybe they're looking for someone young as well to bring along. There's a need at quarterback at the top of this draft, Nick. And, Abdul Carter could very easily be affected by this one way or the other. It's not the greatest quarterback class. We both know that. Everyone knows that. Cam Ward, it seems to be the clear top quarterback available out of Miami. But then you got Shadur Sanders. You mentioned Jackson Dart, Tyler Shuck from Louisville. It's not the best group out there. And if the Titans, if the Browns, if the Giants, they trade up, if they decide, hey, we're not going to go quarterback, like Abdul Carter, who is arguably the top player in this draft, along with Travis Hunter out of Colorado, he could go number 1. He could go number 2. I don't see him falling out of the top 5, really, unless teams go crazy for quarterbacks, which we've seen happen before. Nick, what are your kind of thoughts on Abdul? We know he's a phenomenal prospect and the explosiveness and everything that he's done at Penn State. And, from both a film and production standpoint, he's incredible. But where do you kind of see him right now as we sit a week away, from Penn State's pro day and a month away from the draft, where he might fall in the draft in that first round?
Yeah, I mean, I think, around the time of the combine, it appeared likelier that the Titans were going to go with maybe a non-quarterback option, but now it's certainly starting to feel like they're either going to take Cam Ward or the Giants are going to come up and get Cam Ward. Like, I don't know if there's a scenario now where the first overall pick isn't Cam Ward. So I think that affects things. Then it depends, what do the Browns like, right? Do the Browns like Shador that much to take him at 2? Do they like Jackson Dart that much to take him at 2? I don't think that's a realistic option, but do they like Shador enough? That's the question. And so I think it starts at 2. I think, listen, Abdul Carter and Myles Garrett would be an unbelievable pairing. I think that has to be enticing if you're the Browns, at least. I think the Titans on a trade back, if they don't love, if Shador's there, they don't love him. And this all really comes down to Shador. Like, it really does. Like, how much do teams like Shador Sanders? I think that's going to be the thing. Do the Titans love Shador Sanders? Do the Browns like Shador Sanders? If the Giants stick at 3, do they like Shador Sanders? All of that comes into play. And so I really look at Abdul Carter's kind of his menu of teams. I think it does probably stop around 4. I mean, I don't really think the Patriots would pass on him. I know they need all line help, so maybe they could go with a guy like Will Campbell or Membu out of Mizzou. So I could see that. If we get into a fall scenario with Abdul Carter, it's going to look probably something like this. It's going to look like 2 quarterbacks in the top 3. The third pick is Travis Hunter. And then you add at 4, you get an O-line pick. I look at the Jags, and if they trade Trayvon Walker, that's maybe where Abdul Carter would land. But once you get past that, I mean, I don't really think he gets past 6 to the Raiders. You could pair Max Crosby with Abdul Carter. I think that's a really fun thing there. So I don't really see Abdul Carter falling past 6. I don't really see him going past 5. I have a hard time thinking, if you're thinking about trading Trayvon Walker, you would pass on Abdul Carter. You can pair him with Josh Hines-Allen, makes a lot of sense. So somewhere between 2 and 6 makes sense to me. Probably likelier, in the 2 to 4 range, I think, for Abdul Carter.
Yeah, I was compiling some of the mock drafts that are out there, and from The Athletic, from ESPN, CBS. There's one from Yahoo that had him falling as far as 7 to the Jets, with Ashton Genty going to Raiders at number 6, and that being a way in which Abdul could fall out of the top 6. I just don't see how a guy that talented, like, we've seen top 5 talents, fall 7 to 7 or 10 or even 11, whatever. But you're talking about possibly the number 1 overall player in this class. I just don't see him falling that far. Nick, a couple weeks ago, I put together my own mock draft, partially for fun, but also just to do the exercise and everything. And I will say it is harder than I thought it was going to be. It's more time consuming than I thought it was going to be. And really, I only had one trade because I didn't want to get too bogged down in all of that. But I could totally see it happening where the Giants trade up from 3 to 1 and take Cam Ward, because that front office is desperate. I mean, they've been getting dragged this entire season, separate issue completely, but the Saquon stuff. And they're fighting for their job. And it's like, let's try to buy some time here and get a quarterback. Either that's, Cam Ward at 1, or maybe they trade up to 2 with Shador. But I could easily see the Cleveland Browns saying, all right, we've got Myles Garrett locked up for 4 years here on this massive deal. Let's go with a 5-year rookie contract opposite him and have one of the most devastating 1-2 punches along the defensive line in the NFL, in the AFC, when you've got all these incredible quarterbacks that you've got to be able to pressure and contend with. I mean, I hope for his sake he goes to the Patriots, because I think of those 4 teams that are drafting in the top 4, like, they have the easiest path or the clearest path to contending, sooner than other. I mean, because they have a quarterback and Drake May, and that's about that. And I like Mike Vrabel a lot, but yeah, I think Abdul is one of those where he wants to go number 1. He's been very open, being like, I'm the best player in this draft. I think I should go number 1 overall. And if he does, it might not be the Titans who are there at 1 taking him. They might be trading out or trying to collect picks because they got a lot of needs. But it's going to be really interesting to see how that all pans out for him. And like I mentioned, pro day next week. Not sure how much he's going to do there. If anything, I don't think he really needs to do a whole lot. But Haluba Hall at Penn State will be very crowded for him and for Tyler Warren, Nick, who is looking like a pretty much a nailed on first rounder. I know that there was some buzz in recent weeks that, hey, he might even go top 10, which would be Penn State's first top 10 duo since LeVar Arrington and Courtney Brown in 2000 when Courtney went 1 and LeVar went 2. But he could also fall down to the 20s. He's a tight end, position of need, a super deep position. Where do you kind of see for Tyler Warren this whole thing shaking out?
Yeah, I mean, it does start probably the Jets at 7. I mean, the Jets have set themselves up pretty well to take Tyler Warren. I do think, the moves they've made this offseason have kind of set them up well. I will also say I think a boost to his stock seems to be the falling stock of Tetero and McMillan. Tet was kind of thought of as the top skill player. Whatever you think of Travis Hunter, it was kind of Hunter, Genty, and then McMillan. Now it seems like McMillan might not even be the next receiver off the board. I mean, Matthew Golden might go before him, which means a guy like Warren, if you're looking for a pass catcher, immediately bolts to the top. So I think that's an interesting place for him to go. The Jets with Justin Fields, Garrett Wilson, Breece Hall, they have kind of wanted to add those kind of big-time players. I think Tanner Engstrand could look at a Warren and say he could have a Sam Laporta-like impact to that offense. They're kind of building that thing. They're building it in the shape of the Lions. You could see the kind of working of it, the scaffolding. I think he's an interesting place there. I'm not sure he gets past 20. I think, 20 is the Broncos. I think that's where the Broncos will go. They'll either take him or Colston Loveland out of Michigan, but there are plenty of teams in between there that he could go to. I could see the Seahawks going for a tight end. He could maybe even go to Dallas, I think, is an interesting team that could target tight end. There are a few teams in that kind of area there, the 10 through 20 area, that are going to look at tight end pretty heavily. And Warren, I think, is pretty clearly the top tight end. I think he's separated himself from Loveland. I think they'll both be first-round picks, but 7 through 20, and I am not going to be surprised at all if he goes to the Jets. The Jets like him. I think it's very possible that you see Abdul Carter and Tyler Warren go off the board in the top 10. So do not think that's a crazy scenario whatsoever. He's just such a solid player. So he's going to have a lot of interest around the league.
He does so many things well. And obviously Penn State fans listening to this, catch, run, snap and catch, whatever you ask Tyler Warren to do, he can do for you. But I really think, and this is something I mentioned, I think it was the Bobber Max a week or two ago when we were talking about Tyler. And it's just one thing that is a massive need, a requirement for tight ends, but something that he does particularly well, especially in an age where it's like glorified receivers out there with tight ends, is he blocks really well. As an inline blocker, he's incredible. And you look at the Colts at 14, right? Anthony Richardson, you want to make him work. And he's run first quarterback. Run a little option with Tyler Warren blocking for you, sealing that edge. That helps incredibly. Maybe even a Justin Fields, like you mentioned, Nick, up in New York now, could help him as well. Like, he is just the perfect security blanket, the perfect guy who, when you get him running downhill, into the secondary, no one wants to tackle him, but he's a chain mover and a guy who is going to be heavily valued in this draft. And, I was talking to a few of my buddies, Nick, who are Eagles fans and growing up in the area, they're interested in the draft. They're asking me what I think the Eagles are going to do at 32. I honestly think they're going to trade back, but two guys who they would love to have, and they're all Penn State grads, these guys talking to me, like, they would love to have Tyler Warren and love to have Abdul Carter, but I guess when you win the Super Bowl, like, you're not in position to take either of those two guys, right? Like, Abdul Carter from Philly and the Eagles having a needed edge with Josh Sweat moving on and Milton Williams on the inside moving on. And then a tight end like Dallas Goedert might be on the move. And so interested to see what the Eagles do, but you're our Steelers guy. Where are you at right now not after free agency, because there's still moves that are coming in, and obviously we're waiting on Aaron Rodgers, and that might determine some things. But, if you were to, and I'm kind of putting you on the spot a little bit here, but I'm sure you're prepared in a way. your top three needs, maybe position wise in the first round, guys who might fit that mold for the Steelers. What are you thinking there?
Yeah, so disclaimer, obviously quarterback's a top 3 need, but I don't see them
Yes.
going quarterback. So we will not list quarterback among those. The first one's defensive line. They need a defensive lineman. They released Larry Ogunjobi. They did a pretty nice job getting depth. They signed guys like Daniel Ekuwale. They brought back Isaiah Loudermilk. So they have some depth. Montravius Adams is still there. They have DeMarvin Leal and Logan Lee coming back from injury. So they still have Dean Lowry. So they have depth across the line. They need a starter. And Keanu Benton, I think, is going to move out of the nose tackle. He'll go to the 5 tech. So they need a nose. I mean, big Kenneth Grant from Michigan makes a lot of sense for them. But they could also look at guys like Derek Harmon out of Oregon and Walter Nolan out of Ole Miss. So I think that's one. 2, corner. I think cornerback is interesting. Darius Slay is a really good player, but he's a 1-year patch solution. They could use a slot corner right now, too. So you look at guys like I've seen Will Johnson potentially falling down the board a little bit for Michigan. That would be obviously a type of pick that they would go for. Jahdae Barron out of Texas. You look at him, he's a very Steelersy player. He would be a big-time addition to that secondary. And then the third one that I have, I'm going to split up. Running back / wide receiver. Skill player is what I'll say. The wide receiver position's in a better spot with DK Metcalf there now, but George Pickens is in the last year of his deal. Even if they don't trade him, I don't think they're going to extend him. So he's probably leaving next year unless, there's this epiphany where, he takes this leap on the field and he's not as unpredictable and volatile. And then you just tag him, I'm assuming. They have gobs of cap space next year, so it's not a worry.
I feel like that's asking a lot, though, for George Pickens to get level-headed real quick.
It really is, man. And like Metcalf's the only receiver in the long-term plan. If you really look at that, you have no idea what Roman Wilson is. Calvin Austin's in the last year of his deal. The rest of the guys are just depth players. So, receiver's a big need. So you could take an Emeka Egbuka, a Luther Burden. If Ted McMillan, if his stock continues to fall and he's there at 21, I have a hard time seeing them pass up Ted McMillan. And then running back has to be at least a consideration for them. I mean, Omarion Hampton's probably coming off the board there. I think you're probably going to see 3 first-round running backs, where the third guy is Travion Henderson or somebody else. We'll see. And then, everyone asked me, what if Ashton Jeanty falls? If Ashton Jeanty falls, they are going to sprint to this podium about as fast as they can, but it's not happening. So those are kind of my 3-4-ish needs, I guess.
I like it. No, I mean, at wide receiver, so here's the deal. So when I put together this mock draft, it was poor timing on my part, schedule-wise, because I wrote it up and published it. I wrote it up on like the previous Friday and Saturday, and then published it the Monday morning of free agency when it all started. So the night before, DK Metcalf gets traded to the Steelers, and I had them taking a wide receiver. I had them taking Emeka Egbuka because I had Ted McMillan going earlier, Golden going earlier, and them ended up with, I think, a really professional receiver, a guy who can work out of the slot and provide whoever the quarterback is, just a reliable presence. I like Egbuka a lot and thought, whether it was Jeremiah Smith last year, Marvin Harrison before that, like he constantly was the number 2 there. And I think he's going to be a really number 2 in the league, really good number 2 in the league. But that Sunday night, it's like, all right, they trade for DK. Let me switch it up a little bit. And I just went quarterback, but who knows what's going to happen there. I went with Jackson Dart. But I'm intrigued to see what the Steelers do because there could be guys that fall to them. I don't think Ashton Jeanty, but Omarion Hampton, if he doesn't go 20 to the Broncos, which he feels like an Alvin Kamara 2.0 kind of player that Sean Payton would love to have. But if he falls to 21, I mean, Najee Harris is gone and Jaylen Warren – one more year on his deal? Is he locked up further than that?
Yeah, one more year.
That feels like a good fit. And it's also a fun deal, but my favorite player in this draft, you mentioned him, is Jahdae Barron. I was talking to a friend who's a Ravens fan, and I'm like, he seems like a Ravens-y kind of player. He seems like a Steelers-y kind of player, played all over that Texas defense and stood out on their CFP run, dime linebacker, safety corner, wherever you need him. He feels like, he can just slot right in and play well for you. So he's a guy that I'm looking, not only for the Steelers, but, for a lot of teams there. If he doesn't go top 10, a possible trade up candidate for a team in the late teens, early 20s. Nick, as we kind of wrap this thing up a little bit, I just wanted to kind of give you the floor. Doesn't have to be Steelers related necessarily, but you were down there at the Senior Bowl, right? You were out at the combine, and you've been following this NFL draft process as closely as anyone. Give me two or three names that you just really like. Two or three guys that you really like. And if you give me Abdul and Travis Hunter, I'll make fun of you for a little bit, but that's all right. Two or three guys though that on draft night you're really intrigued to see where they go because you love them so much.
Okay, I have a few guys. I'll give you the first one out of Virginia Tech, Bashil Tootin. Real fun running back prospect. He ran a 4.32 at the combine. Um, if you are a team that is running a Shanahan-ish scheme, the wide zone stuff, this guy averaged almost 8 yards per carry on wide zone in his college career. He's a walking home run. I mean, if you want to look at a guy, when we talk about the super deep running back class, if you want to talk about a guy that is, the walking epitome of a guy that's going to get pushed down that should go earlier, he might go in the 4th round. And this guy's a day 2 talent. The big knock on him are going to be the fumbles. But if he can fix that, I mean, this guy has explosive potential. Reminds me, like, if there is a Devon Achane in this class, it's going to be Bashil too. He is a rocket, instant go. The Steelers are going to be very interested in him. I think they're going to host him for a pre-draft visit. He's someone I think everyone needs to pay attention to. He's a really fun player to look at. Another player I really love, and this is actually at wide receiver, is Ricky White out of UNLV. Really fun player.
Special teams ace. I love that guy. I
Dude,
love that guy. He was one of my favorite players last year to watch.
dude, he's going to be in the NFL for a decade plus and do it all on special teams. But I think he has like legit upside as a receiver. Like,
Oh
he's
yeah. Oh yeah.
fast, he's savvy, he's tough. He's got this like vertical threat ability, so he's going to be an elite gunner, elite coverage guy. But if he can like polish up the route running, polish up the release game, he could be a deep threat for you. I think if you're in the type of offense that asks guys to do a lot of horizontal field stretching with over routes, crossers, digs, mesh, all that stuff, he can just make big plays out of nothing. Man, he's so much fun. I think I think he's got a sneaky chance to sneak into day 2. It's not a great receiver class. So I think he's got a chance to really get in there when people maybe don't think he will. And then the third guy that I really love, let's go to corner. I really love this guy's game, and I think he's being slept on. Quincy Riley out of Louisville. I've watched him play. Um, I'm a Pitt fan, so I watch Pitt and I watch Louisville a lot just because they're on. And this guy, I have no idea how he is not a top 50 player. He can play in press. He can play in zone. He's a man-covered ball hawk. He is a good tackler in space. He's going to go in the 3rd or the 4th round. I think some team that gets him is going to get an absolute steal. This is a good corner class. He's behind guys like Darian Porter, Trey Amos, Max Harrison. In that other tier, the Azarie Thomas, like these guys are going to go, in that 30 to 75 range. Quincy Riley's probably going to go somewhere in the 80 to 120 range. He should be in the tier above that. He's such a fun player. He can play in the slot. He can play outside. I remember seeing him at the Senior Bowl, and I was like, how is this guy not thought of as a higher player? He's a really fun player. So those three, Bashil Tootin, Ricky White, and Quincy Riley. I got plenty more guys. I could name like the entire defensive line class that I love as well. Jamari Caldwell from Oregon, really fun player. Everyone focuses on Harmon, Birch, and Bassa. Jamari Caldwell is a really good nose tackle and is going to have a really good NFL career. But there's so many good players. But those three are the ones that stick out to me.
I can't wait to see where those guys go. Like Ricky White I had a man crush on that guy throughout all of like the previous 2 seasons. And even with UNLV early last year when their quarterback, ends up entering the portal, NIL issues, whatever, who knows who was right there. But Ricky White, I remember him coming out and saying, we've got our guy in Hajj Malik Williams. And UNLV was a great team last year. Ricky White had such a big part of that. Little inside baseball. When I got NCAA 25, the video game that everyone I'm sure has played by now, my first dynasty mode I hopped in with was UNLV because I'm like, I need to block some punts with Ricky White. I can't wait to see where he goes. And really all these guys, right? Because you're really into the scouting of it all, the film breakdowns of it, and obviously covering college football, being an AP voter. Like I'm obviously super in tune with Penn State, but also just with college football in general, and draft night, and really like sometimes round 4 and 5 I enjoy even more than round 1. Seeing like, oh wow, that guy went in the 5th round, like that doesn't make any sense or whatever else. It's the best time of year. We got March Madness starting up here. We've got the draft upcoming, pro day next week for Penn State, and Nick, it was great to catch up with you and talk a little Abdul Carter, Tyler Warren, Steelers outlook, and I'm sure that we'll catch up again soon before the draft. We'll get together and chat. But just wanted to thank you for joining me today. And where can our Penn State fans who maybe don't follow you yet, but certainly will after this, where can they find you?
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter at Farabaugh FB. You're on Blue Sky. I'm at Nick Farabaugh. Make sure to check out, the Steelers coverage at PennLive, and also the Steelers Blitz. That is our Steelers YouTube channel. We have podcasts coming out every week. I have little short stand-ups I do as well. So if you're into the Steelers, go to that. On my Twitter, I'll post not only about the Steelers, but I'll post some NFL draft stuff. So if you're into that as well, feel free to give me a follow.
I love it. I love it, Nick. Thanks so much for joining us today, man. Really appreciate it. And we'll be back, Penn State fans, next week. Me and Bob we'll be hopping on with it for a Monday podcast. I have to double check with him on that, make sure he's still good with that, because he's going to be working his tail off all weekend doing NCAA wrestling coverage. But we should have that for you. Penn State spring camp starts early next week, pro day next Friday. A lot going on with Penn State, a lot going on ahead of the NFL draft. Stay tuned to PennLive for all of our coverage with that. Nick, have a great day. Everyone else, have a great day and enjoy the weekend.
Cool.
Awesome. Good stuff, buddy.
And our recordings are good, so we should be okay.